Hello YouTube, this is Boston Best 0407, and this is going to be a response video to Rocking Mr.E's How the Left Revises the Political Spectrum. And I kind of wanted to do this video, earlier, but I kept screwing it up, and then I was kind of busy, so I didn't really get around to sitting down and, airing out all of my views and feelings and doing it in a way that I was comfortable, happy with. Therefore, I'm doing it now, and hopefully this take will stick. To give some context as to why I'm doing this video, I was flipping around YouTube maybe a week and a half ago, and I came across this video, How the Left Revises the Political Spectrum, by Rocking Mr.E. And I watched it, and he basically made the argument that the difference between right and left is really, and in truth, a difference between collectivism and individualism. That is, the left is for collectivism, the right is for individualism. And what this really amounts to is a difference between no government, total chaos, and total government until we die. And I heard this, and I just wanted to pull my hair out of my head, because I've heard this argument so many different times, in libertarian circles, that I have to kind of it just drives me crazy, because it's really not true, and it kind of obscures and sort of, it really obscures the nature of the political spectrum. And it doesn't really leave a great deal of room for nuance or difference or whatever. It bunches a whole bunch of people who have nothing to do with each other. Socialists, communists, fascists, Nazis, monarchists. I mean, every authoritarian group you can imagine, even if the particular details of their ideology, even what they actually believe in, doesn't make any difference. It's all on the left. And the same thing with the right, only it's just a bunch of people who it's like Republicans, anarcho-communists, and they do exist, by the way. People who favor direct democracy, and people who want an individualistic, propertarian, free market, Rothbardian, anarcho-capitalist dream. All these people on the same side of the spectrum. It's like, wow. Like, how is that even possible? And why would you even make that argument? And I don't usually do this. I don't usually comment on videos, but I commented. And I got into an argument. I got into an argument with Rocking Mr.E. Got into an argument with this other guy, and I got blocked. Now, I want to point out that I really had not gone on there, to be a jerk or to argue. I really just wanted to have a rational debate or discussion about the political spectrum. I was not sitting here to promote so-called leftist propaganda, which Rocking Mr.E actually accused me of. And I really was I have to say I felt disrespected, when I was blocked, because I don't have anything wrong with Rocking Mr.E. I actually like several of his videos. But I just think he was wrong, and I didn't come on there really to argue. I dealt with the facts. I wanted to this is really just how I am, because I'm naive. I'm really naive at my core, and I tend to think that people, are capable of having, rational, adult, discussions about something, and it's and by the way, it's an important topic because it affects all of us. But and I thought I could have that, and obviously I couldn't. And I got blocked, and I got commented. I got people commenting on what I said, and they could pretty much say whatever they want after I was already blocked. They could pretty much say whatever I want. They could misrepresent my views, or say something or say something that, comment on something I had said without me really being able to defend myself. So I was very frustrated by this. And I went back later and wanted to come in again, and I clearly got blocked. So, it was kind of very, very frustrating to me. And so this is one of the reasons why I'm doing this video, is because I wanna set the record straight on the political spectrum according to how I understand it, And by the way, I don't claim to be an expert. I'm not a political scientist. I just read a lot about the topic because the topic the topic is one of interest to me. So I know a lot about politics, political science. I know a lot about left and right political ideas. So I would say that my knowledge is pretty solid. And I also want to point out that everything I'm going to say in this video is not coming from me. It's stuff I've read from other people who are much smarter than I am. And also various things I've just picked up from reading different things that people said. So anyway, if you're looking on your screen, you can see what is the typical political spectrum, the political compass. And if you look at it, you see right on the right, left on the left. Then on the top you have authoritarian, and on the bottom you have libertarian. Now it should be pointed out that all of this is just generic. It's not describing hardcore, political ideology in detail, or even political philosophy. It's not describing any of those things. It's just generic. Now, it's just generic terms, even authoritarian and libertarian. Libertarian isn't referring to libertarian political ideology. These are just generic terms. Now, of course, if you're a layman and you don't know anything about, politics or political science or anything, and you look at this, obviously you're going to have some cluelessness. You're not really going to know exactly what any of this really actually means. But that being said, if you were able to, for example, examine yourself, and you thought to yourself, well, okay, I tend to be a kind of a traditional person. I tend to feel some loyalty to, traditional values. I tend to appreciate traditional institutions and social structures. I may even be very religious. I may be very family oriented. I tend not to really trust the masses too much. I'm not really necessarily bothered by the concept of hierarchy. I may be a strong believer in private property, and I tend to think. I even tend to think maybe in terms of personal freedom, that kind of thing, and I kind of have a problem with, a sort of mass group, kind of thought process, or whatever the case may be. Now, if I've examined all those aspects of myself, I would probably conclude, if I understood the term right, that I would be on the right. That is, if you explain to me, that my views would be to the right, I would realize, oh look, I'm to the right. Now, the fact that I am to the right, let's say, what does that mean? I mean, what does it mean to be to the right? Well, terms that are typically used to describe a right-wing mindset would be terms like conservative or reactionary. Now, conservative and reactionary, a lot of times they sort of meant to mean the same thing, but they're slightly different from each other. The difference really is one between the conservative who wants to kind of move slowly. So if I'm the kind of person that is really, really turned off by radicalism, speed, just disrespect for the status quo and disrespect for tradition and custom, and I'm affected by the concept of the radical on the other side who just wants to change everything, I would say I'm a conservative. With that being said, I'm not necessarily opposed to, I'm not necessarily opposed, to change. I just think it should conform to certain customs and traditions and have a certain guidance, a certain set of standards that it goes by. Therefore, I'm not actually bothered by, say, the concept of equality. I believe in equality under the law, let's say. And I do believe, to a certain extent, people should be treated equally under the law. But at the same time, I have a problem with the radical who wants to change human nature. Therefore, I'm kind of a pessimist. And at my core, I'm very pessimistic. Therefore, I want to preserve the current state of affairs because I believe this provides me guidance. Therefore, I respect my ancestors. I respect the way it was done in the past. I respect how my grandparents did it. and I'm not necessarily too open to, the concept of political change in the sense of moving forward at a very fast pace. Now, if I'm a reactionary, my temperament is a little bit different. Not only am I just staunchly opposed to the radical and really bothered by the concept of moving forward at a fast pace, I want to go back to the past. Not only do I want to go back to the past, I don't believe in the concept of equality at my core. I don't believe in any of that. I believe in hierarchy. I believe in keeping things the same to such an extent, and I'm not bothered by, to a large degree, by differences and distinctions in society, and therefore I'm very much opposed to the radicals coming in and wanting to change things. I want to keep things the same, and not only do I want to keep things the same, I want to go back to the past. And so I'm much less inclined to be a moderate or to adapt. I am deeply affected by the challenge to, if I happen to be an aristocrat, let's say, to challenge my power, or if I'm just not really an aristocrat, but I happen to sympathize with them, I'm bothered by the concept of challenging their power. And that's what it would mean to have sort of a right-wing mindset. It's two different temperaments. One's a little bit more moderate, one's a little bit more reasonable, the other is a little bit slightly more extreme. And more consciously, that kind of thing. Now, I just want to point out that I commented on my video that I myself was reactionary and ultra-conservative. I want to point out that myself personally, I'm a blend of both. I'm kind of a blend of both ideas. I can be a bit of a reactionary. I tended to project, the current state of liberalism and that kind of thinking. And I tend to look back at the old days, going back to say the Middle Ages, for example. I've always been a strong admirer of medieval society. And I find that, not saying that they didn't have a horrible life, but the culture of pre-industrial agrarian societies are, to me, a much higher form of human society and human development and humans, whatever you want to call it, than today. I don't like modern values. I don't like liberal values. I value, what they had, not necessarily, the fact that they died of diseases and lived only to 30, not that per se, but the culture. And it would be nice, I think, if there was a culture like what they had within the context of a more of a modern society. That's kind of my thinking, which is why I sometimes say I'm a political centrist of sorts. And and this may even be somewhat incriminating, but whatever. But anyway, moving on. Now, if you look at the left side of the political spectrum, and if I'm not any of those things I just said, if let's say, for example, I tend to put a lot of value on the individual. I tend to believe in personal freedom, but not within the conception of say, property. I tend to disconnect people from property, and I tend to put people above property, and I tend to favor a kind of, I like in actuality the liberal, the liberal world of being able to choose and make your own choices of personal freedom, and I think people should be able to do whatever they want with their bodies, to a slightly extreme degree. Whereas, for example, maybe the conservative, for example, on the other side, is not bothered by those things. I'm contrary to that in the sense that I'm opposed, and I have a problem with tradition, and I'm impatient with the concept of keeping things the same. I'm young, I'm youthful, let's say, whereas they say the conservative is much older, much more advanced in age and more mature in his mindset and has more wisdom than I do. But nevertheless, I'm youthful, so therefore I want a different kind of world. Now, if that's what it would be if I would say a liberal, because when you're thinking of this type of mindset, you could probably break it down to terms like liberal or progressive. Now, there's other things like radical, but I'm not really talking about the radical. I'm talking specifically about the liberal or the progressive. That was the liberal. Now, the progressive is a little bit different. He has a communitarian sense of how the world should work. He believes that the government or that the community itself has a role in taking care of the individual. That there's a role for community welfare is important to him. But where he tends to tends to differ himself from the other side, because there's an extent which old-fashioned conservatism was communitarian. He has no real patience with tradition. He wants to move forward. He wants to move forward at a progressive pace, move forward to something better. Therefore, he's more concerned with the quality of human beings. He wants to provide for everybody. He wants to create a better world for all, and that's his manner of thinking. And he's very impatient with social hierarchies and traditions which he sees as oppressive. Therefore, he is interested in getting rid of what he sees as oppressive to the individual and to mankind in general. He's very different than the liberal in that the liberal may feel the same way to a large degree. The liberal still doesn't really want to be caught up in the community per se. He puts the individual higher than the community. Now the progressive can't really vibe with that. Has a problem with that, but he wants to. He still has a progressive mindset. Now, all that is essentially how things work. One side, the left side, it should be pointed out, this manner of thinking they tend to be more egalitarian, both sides. And this is sort of it's not really a perfect sketch. I'm not really describing it very well, but it's a general temperament of those who make up conservative and liberal. Now, the difference really between conservatism and the other side, not conservative and liberal, right and left rather. Sorry. Now, the difference between right and left in this sense is that while there may be very strong or particular ideologies that would be considered by most people to be on the right, such as Fascism and Nazism, conservatism, or the notion of being conservative, is really a situational ideology. It's not something that is written in stone. There's no real particular, like, for example, I would say that for myself, I would consider myself to be a very conservative person, and I would say that if I lived in, say, Britain, I would probably be a monarchist. I would probably uphold the House of Lords, and I would preserve those. Even if I was progressive in other areas, even if I favored other things, I would, at my core, want to preserve these institutions as a product of the heritage of my country. Therefore, I would be for that. But it's not even really that I promote those things in of themselves. Rather, I want to preserve the heritage of my country. Same thing with the Constitution. I tend to believe the Constitution is a very flawed document in a lot of sense. But I favor preserving the Constitution because it's the heritage of my country. It's where my country comes from. It's the founding document of my country. Therefore, I as a conservative, I feel a connection with the past. I feel a desire to preserve the past. And that is a very important value for me. And it's not just something that's personal, it's also political. Because I believe that documents such as the Constitution are important. Now, the other side of this, liberal, progressive, but then as you get into, for example, someone being a socialist and being more in that mindset, and then communist, it's not situational. It is permanent and defined. The socialist tends to see the world in a very objective way, or not even an objective way, but in a total way. That is, even if he's more of a democratic socialist, even if he favors something more without bureaucracy and big government, even if he favors a more democratic system, or even if he's more of an anarcho-socialist, because, by the way, those exist, he tends to see the world in a total way. He believes human beings are at their core all born equal. He sees them as being essentially equal, and therefore entitled and worthy to resources. And he has a problem with the idea that they should be kept out of resources. Whereas the right-winger, even if he favors, for example, personal freedom, and tends to be very liberal, the right-winger, like say for example, a right-wing libertarian, as opposed to a left-wing libertarian. because after all, they exist. He favors all personal freedom, but he believes people are entitled, and this is something I probably should have mentioned before, he believes people are essentially entitled to maintain, what they earned. Therefore, that's what he believes. That's why he's a propertarian. But the socialist, the other side, doesn't really believe that. He believes people are born equal, and he sees the desire to preserve wealth, let's say, is denying other people the right to resources. Therefore, he doesn't like private property, for example. Even if he believes in private property, even if he believes in an economy based on that, he still believes that there should be some mechanism to hold private property to, like, for example, the state should regulate industry or that kind of thing. That's kind of how he thinks. Or, he wants to create a revolutionary situation in which that sort of system doesn't exist. Now, one of the arguments I got into with Rocking Mr.E at one point was that it really doesn't matter what needs to be preserved or changed. That is, what really doesn't matter, because this is my argument. What really doesn't matter, preservation and change. And really, it's really what irritates me about this is that it's really about value judgments. When you're sitting there and trying to evaluate, political ideas or what kind of political ideas you want, it's really about, what kind of world you want to live in. Therefore, if I want to live in a traditional world, an old-fashioned culture, if I want to have a mechanism where I'm doing what my grandparents did, what my great-grandparents did, what my ancestors did, and that's the world I want to live in, well, that's a political value judgment I've made, if that's the kind of society I want to live in. Whereas if I want to live in a society that is completely egalitarian and has no real coercion of any kind, that is all property is owned by the community, everybody works the same thing, the socialist or communist dream, that's also a political value judgment. And if I want to live in reality, whether I'm either to the right or the left, and I want to kind of want to go to the center, and I'm a little bit more of a moderate in that sense, and therefore I may want to kind of preserve wealth and property on one side, or I would kind of want to create a more egalitarian system within the context of the current order. That's also a political value judgment I've made. Therefore, getting rid of something and preserving it is a part of politics, and you cannot make any kind of you cannot say it isn't. The problem with what I was arguing with Rocking Mr.E, or rather what Rocking Mr.E said, was that why would a personal preference make any difference? And this is the kind of the conundrum of libertarianism, and why a very long time ago I stopped being a libertarian. It's because they see the world in this manner, and they think it's all a matter of personal preference. It's not. It's not. It's personal preference, but then it's personal preference in the marketplace of political ideas, which means that if you have a conservative personality, it affects your political outlook. It can. And if you have a more liberal, progressive mindset, it affects your political outlook. Both affect your political outlook, and they affect your political choices that you can make. Therefore, they are important. And one is on the right and one is on the left. And the terms right and left are merely generic terms that we use to describe these ideas. Now, I spent a very long time trying to break down trying to break down in detail what the conservative and the liberal, really the left and the right, tend to believe in, what those temperaments mean and how they manifest themselves in concrete political ideas. Now I've described, 4, temperaments: conservative, reactionary, progressive, liberal. Now, from there, you can choose the level of government. This is where Rocking Mr.E and other libertarians, and I should also add that I actually got into an argument with this guy who said that Rocking Mr.E was discussing the prevailing view in Europe, which I thought was really a kicker because, if Rocking Mr.E is trying to promote if this is the prevailing view in Europe, then either Europeans don't know their own history, which I doubt, or Rocking Mr.E doesn't know his own history. He's from England. And the Tories and the conservatives and thus the right wingers there have always, to one degree or another, been for government. Now maybe this has changed. Maybe this has completely changed because there's a habit. That's a habit that sometimes happens. Sometimes politics changes. Sometimes what's conservative one day is different than what's liberal one day, and so on and so forth. Whatever. But the fact of the matter is, historically, the right in Europe has been far more for government than the right in my country, because it reflects different political heritages. One, the political heritage of Europe is feudal and aristocratic, whereas America is capitalistic and more oriented around like a free market, that kind of thing. Constitutional republic, It says those are the fundamental political differences between Europe and the United States. Now, to get back to what I was saying, see, this is where Rocking Mr.E, for example, when he said that it was all about government or about choosing the extent of government you want, and it's all about coercion. Well, the thing is that fact is important, and there's an extent to which that's true. If you are thinking about politics, and you've already established what your views are, then you might need to choose how much government you want. Basically, what this means is if you have a conservative or reactionary agenda versus a progressive or liberal agenda, you might want to choose the extent of government. Now, but the problem is that he made the whole issue an extent to which you choose government. That's not true. Now, after I've established left and right, what becomes clear is if you're conservative reactionary, you can choose how and to what extent, how and what way you want to pursue that agenda. That is, how much government do you want? Do you want to pursue your conservative reactionary agenda in an authoritarian way or in a libertarian way? Do you want to pursue your progressive and liberal agenda in an authoritarian way or in a libertarian way? Now, this is very interesting. And what becomes clear is if you go back far enough to, say, the monarchy, that is, monarchists, these conservatives or reactionaries favor the monarchy, and how this would make them right-wing authoritarians. They favor the monarchy. They favor the absolute monarchy. Or after a while, maybe they favor a constitutional monarchy, which in that sense would make them right-wing libertarians in the generic sense as opposed to a more concrete ideological sense. Now that's how that works. That's how that works. And then on the other side is you can have those who are more liberal, progressive, socialist, whatever. And you have people in this manner of thinking who may favor a more authoritarian way to pursue their social change and social justice, which is personified in authoritarian communism. It's personified in Maoist regimes, Marxist-Leninist regimes, and all of these different regimes that felt that to do better for the people, that there was a responsibility of the party to take control of the means of production, and to pursue that for the purpose of pursuing the revolution and the utopia that they wanted. And now if you look at the other side, and this actually leads to a very interesting point about the history of Marxism, because if you look on the other side, you have a lot of left-wing anarchists and left-wing libertarians out there. You don't hear about them very much, but they exist. There was at one point when the left was anti-government, where Karl Marx, and this is one of the most bizarre things I think about having to discuss these kind of issues with someone like Rocking Mr.E, because the fact of the matter is Marx was not a pro-government guy. He said the dictatorship of the proletariat, and there was an extent which he believed the state needed to exist. But when he was thinking in the future, he favored communism, and how he defined communism, according to Marxist theory, was a stateless, classless society. Now, this has nothing to do with utopia. It has nothing to do with the utopian concept. We're not even discussing the substance of his ideas, just what they were. And this is what they were. So it's wrong. And the original leftists were like this, but the primary and fundamental area which they disagreed with was what to do. They wanted a revolution. They wanted no government. They wanted a stateless, classless society. But how do you get there? Marx said there has to be an intermediary period between capitalism and communism. He called it socialism. People like Mikhail Bakunin, for example, debated him and said, no, we need to have a revolution. It needs to destroy the state today. The revolution needs to destroy the state then. Then, that must be the end of the state. That's what they argued. And so the original leftists, people who made up, for example, the Paris Commune, in some instances, a lot of these people were anarchists. And there's actually a variety of different people who made up the Paris Commune. I'll probably leave some of that in the low bar. But that was how that happened. And then later on, Lenin in Russia, largely for the unique political reasons that occurred in Russia, he formulated a theory of Marxism that was authoritarian in nature, and he developed the concept of the Communist Party. Well, I should probably, refine that last point. It wasn't necessarily authoritarian in nature, at least not initially. But it definitely was not democratic. And he developed the notion of the Vanguard Party. And this set the history for all the failures of Marxism and communism that we all know. Because he came up with the concept of the Vanguard Party. And the problem was with the dictatorship of the proletariat, the Communist Party would take over the dictatorship of the proletariat. And in essence, it would end up being a dictatorship of the party and those within the party. And while there was the concept of democratic centralism within the party that was supposed to make things more democratic, it didn't make things more democratic. It actually accelerated the anti-democratic nature of Marxist-Leninist theory. That is, it kept a vast majority of the people outside of the access to political power, and thus it just basically represented what always existed in Russia, going back to the Tsar. And therefore, the communist state, as it evolved, just became a continuation of the Tsar, just in just with the colored language of communist and Marxist, I guess you would say propaganda. So color the Tsarist state with Marxist theory and Marxist themes and ideas, and you got Marxist-Leninist, the modern communist state, or what was the modern communist state. And that's what led to its failure, because at that point it completely discredited everything related to Marxist theory. It created an authoritarian communism, which initially which by the way I should also point out was initially revolutionary. And after a while, it became more conservative. All of the regimes, especially after Stalin took over, became left-wing nationalists. All of the regimes out in Eastern Europe became conservative, left-wing nationalists, because that's what you would call it. And which is kind of a contradiction, but they became what we would call left-wing nationalists. Because nationalism, by the way, isn't really either left or right ideology. It cannot be either left or right depending on different contexts. But they did become more conservative, especially in areas of things like the family. Because there's a story. They wanted a revolutionary conception of the family initially, and it failed. That is, it led to homeless children, if I'm not mistaken. And they were breaking down of the traditional family, created such a problem they had to shape up. These are problems that happen within the history of communism. There was war communism, which failed. They tried to abolish money, failed completely, and had to reshape that really quickly. It became clear that the utopia wasn't working. Part of this was probably the fact that they weren't ready for it. They even defied communist theory. That is, communism had to occur at a point when capitalism had fully developed. Capitalism hadn't even developed in Russia. It was something that emerged for entirely political reasons. They thought of themselves actually as engaging in both a bourgeois revolution, as what happened in the capitalist countries, and a proletariat revolution at the same time. And this led to all sorts of problems that eventually led to the discrediting of communism, because it just became, I guess you could say, it just became hypocritical after a while, because it was egalitarian, but it was authoritarian. It was egalitarian, but the clearly anti-egalitarian nature of the social structure discredited the ideology. Now, all that being said, I want to point out something else, and I've kind of gone on for a while now, but these are all really important points that I hope people listen to. Now, this also brings up an interesting point, because what becomes very clear is that within ideologies, there is a right and a left, actually. And so you have within ideologies the same mindset. If you're part of, say, Marxism, and you want to preserve the traditional ideas of Marxism, you would be considered what might be called an orthodox Marxist. Now, ironically enough, given that, if you go back far enough into classical Marxism and orthodox Marxism, the ideas were not particularly authoritarian. They were based on ideas such as the Paris Commune. And if you read a detailed analysis of the Paris Commune, whether you agree with the Paris Commune or not, they were not a particularly authoritarian regime. They were a very democratic regime. They engaged in direct democracy. So that was what the dictatorship of the proletariat was supposed to look like, according to Marx, Engels. But then Lenin and all them kind of screwed that up a little bit because of the Leninist theory of the vanguard party. Now, that led to kind of an ironic situation within Marxism, where the right of Marxism ended up becoming orthodox Marxism, Marxism-Leninism, whereas the left of Marxism became those who favored a direct democracy, a more egalitarian setup. The ideas of people like Rosa Luxemburg, and a lot of the very early Marxists, and the classical Marxists. So those who favored a more decentralized system, were more people were more anarcho-communist, people like Mikhail Bakunin and others along that line of thinking, anarchists. They all became the left of that, although not all of them were technically Marxists. Now, that also leads to an interesting point about anarchism. Anarchism as a political ideology is broken up between individual anarchism and collectivist anarchism. And the collectivist anarchism were people who look more communistic or socialistic anarchists, people who favored a more collective, division. They really were people who admired the tribal society, the supposedly egalitarian, even to some extent matriarchal nature of the tribal society, whether that was true or not. And they wanted something more along those lines. And they wanted a motto of that within an industrial modern economy. Now, then there was those who are really personified, and I'm sure people who Rocking Mr.E very much likes, like Murray Rothbard, who were individualist anarchists. This can be thought of as a left and right of anarchism. And you even have left and right within political parties. There's a left and right in a lot of political parties, those who want to keep the traditional motives of the party, there, and those who want to kind of are in favor in adapting and changing. And every political party has a more of a conservative branch and a liberal branch. That's kind of what that means. Now, now that I've explained all that, I also want to point out that there are blends in syncretic politics, blends of left and right, and this is where the subject of fascism and Nazism come in, because it's really an interesting history of fascism and Nazism, because they were really, we think of them as far right because we remember their social policies, we remember their belief in hierarchy, their social Darwinist kind of conception. We remember the fact that they were in many ways very reactionary and class-oriented and all that kind of stuff. Remember them for their views on race, all that kind of thinking. But we don't remember them for their economic policies. We don't know, for example, that their economic policies were very similar to the New Deal. That is, they were very Keynesian. And we don't really remember or know, or we disregard the fact that, to a large extent, much of the history of fascism, or what fascism was influenced by in many instances during its early days, or what led to what created the intellectual basis for fascism was the progressive movement. All that stuff that libertarians talk about is 100% accurate. Libertarians, Mises, the Mises Institute, I've seen all these people talk about this. It's all accurate. It's all true. It's all true. Every bit of it's true. But the thing they, of course, obscure is they associate with the whole spectrum of left-wing politics, the whole spectrum of progressivism, and it sort of misses the point. It sort of just completely obscures the point. Is that, just because fascism developed as the most extreme variant of that progressive mindset, let's say, it doesn't really mean anything. It doesn't really say anything about modern progressive politics. Now, but that being said, what you could call fascism and Nazism was third way or centrist political ideas of, a third way or centrist, political mindset, temperament, because it's a blend of both ideas. Now, when you look at the history of both fascism and Nazism, they have parallel histories in that both of them actually emerged as left-wing nationalist ideas. If you go back and look at fascism, it started out, there was a left-wing nationalist movement in Italy called the National Syndicalist movement, which were, in a sense, national anarchists. And they started out a certain way. I don't know their politics in detail. I haven't read about it too much in detail. But they started out in that mindset. And then as time went on, they embraced militarism. They became more authoritarian. And they evolved into fascism. Mussolini, who was a socialist, finally after a while realized that socialism had failed. And when he looked at the situation, he realized that the bourgeoisie, the capitalist class, were more internationalists than the working class, and the working class were actually more nationalists. And he realized that there were all these different interest groups and things, and he decided to try to bring that together and create class collaboration. Thus, he blended a concept of class collaboration, a corporatist economy, which all this stuff was emerging within, if I'm not mistaken, the National Syndicalist movement, the Syndicalist movement. They were very much in the line of thinking. All these discussions about economics relating into the left and to left-wing anarchist type of ideas, and he blended all of this with all of the different groups into an authoritarian ideology, and pursued a more right wing, what you'd call a more right wing, political agenda in terms of social hierarchy and that kind of thing. But then there was also a social dominance and elitist mentality within that. And there became almost a revolutionary manifestation of that thinking. Initially, therefore, there was part of fascism that wanted to create a new society with new elites, and maybe even meritocratic. And you could if you were just a lowly everyday person, you could move up in that society, that kind of thing. And thus that was an interesting manifestation of that thinking. But then, as time went on, they actually became more conservative, and then a conservative faction emerged within fascism that was more traditional, more oriented on the Catholic Church, and wanted to preserve the current elites, still fascists, but that's what they wanted, and therefore fascism eventually evolved in that direction, and it became more reactionary over time. But Italian fascism was never as reactionary as Nazism. There was actually Julius Evola, who probably one of the most influential and important thinkers on the far right. He regarded his ideology as radical traditionalism, and he was a strong and staunch reactionary. He wanted to go back to like 1,000 years almost, and he also came up with a lot of racial theories. Was an esoterist, and he wanted fascism to move into a more reactionary direction, into a more radical traditionalist type of direction. And this never really worked out. He never became a member of the party, and I think he was actually kind of persecuted almost for not being a member of the party. So there was an element of fascism that was too progressive, or that was more in that manner of thinking on social progress. And there's also a connection to futurism and that kind of thinking in fascism. So I would say that part of this syncretic nature of fascism probably was why fascism in in its Italian sense, because Italian fascism wasn't really particularly racist. There was Jews in it. There wasn't a racial theory behind it. It was a nationalist ideology, but there wasn't a racial theory at the basis of it. And this is probably why it ended up not really becoming not because of the racial theories, but it was because of this that it eventually didn't really hold on, and didn't really become anything in. It's not remembered today. There are no real strong neo-fascist movements in that sense. Maybe in Italy there are, but most of the people on the far right tend to be neo-Nazis. Nazis are the ones we remember the most. Now, the Nazis themselves were more reactionary, and they had a parallel history as well, because they emerged from the original National Socialist movement. This was a left-wing nationalist movement, which was trying to form I think they probably realized the same thing that Mussolini, certainly realized, was that the working class were more nationalistic than the bourgeoisie or the capitalist class, and therefore, you couldn't really get around this. They were more, the bankers and people like that were more internationalists, and therefore this is probably what led to the basis of, for example, the Jewish conspiracy theories and that kind of thing. But these left-wing nationalists emerged, and they wanted to create a non-Marxian variant of socialism that was, I guess, probably uniquely German, and there's a strong nationalist element out of that, but they were essentially leftists at their core. Now this eventually evolved into a kind of racial Marxism. That is, Marxism was turned on its head, whereas Marxism was a difference between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. It became a difference between, like, say the Jews and the Aryan race, the Jews and everybody else. The Jews were the ruling class. Everybody else was oppressed, particularly the aliens who were like the proletariat, the great workers. Great workers of the world. Aliens of the world unite kind of thing. You can almost think of it like that, just that variation of it. And if I'm wrong and someone knows I'm wrong, please comment on the video and explain it to me, because I haven't read the details of that in a while, but I know that kind of thinking was to a large degree the case. Now, where does this leave Hitler? Because I've heard a lot of people like Rocking Mr.E say Hitler was a leftist, which is just utterly absurd. Hitler was far from a leftist. Now, I can see how someone can think, oh, National Socialism, there must have been a left-wing party. But see, the thing is, it's an irony of history about how this worked out. Now, Hitler came from the German military. He served in World War I. And when he got out, or when he was done with serving in World War I, he began working in the military as a spy. And this is the first time with which he came in contact with the German Workers' Party. He came to them one day, saw them, wasn't particularly impressed by the party platform, but as he was walking out, he was accosted by some person, and he ripped that person a new one. So much so that the members of the party were impressed by his ability to speak, and they offered him to join the party. So Hitler was not originally the one who formed the German Workers' Party. He was asked to join the party. Now he became one of the biggest figures in the party, and he was very responsible for building up the party platform and many of the ideas, many of the theoretical ideas that are now what we would think of as National Socialism or Nazism. And among other people as well. But the thing that's important to understand is that Hitler was steeped within the reactionary and ultra-conservative culture of the German military. If you go back, you find that during World War I, the Germans were an empire. They had territorial holdings. They had all these different things. They got involved in the war. They lost the war, and they were held accountable for starting the war. They were blamed for it. And the Versailles Treaty, was regarded by many as being an assault on them. They called the leaders the November criminals, and their regime fell. That Reich fell. Now, and it became the Weimar Republic. The military was frustrated at this because they wanted to go back to their old greatness. They were mad that they had this mediocre, bourgeois, liberal culture, this Republican system that took over, and there was many political thinkers during that period that they made up for example, the conservative revolutionary movement, and these were guys who wanted to go back to the old days. They were in many instances monarchists. They wanted to reassert the monarchy, The monarchy was dead at that point. They wanted to break democracy, and they're very frustrated at the current state of affairs within this liberal society, and they were very upset. And the thing is that for a lot of the everyday people, it was probably not a particularly bad system. They were probably very happy with it. For the most part, initially anyway, before the recession, before inflation, all that kind of stuff during the Weimar period happened, and it led to a lot of problems with particularly working people, which created the basis for Hitler's rise to power. But the German military were very frustrated at this. Those who were coming back from World War I felt that they had been betrayed by their leaders, and many of these frustrated, disgruntled soldiers, made up a considerable amount of those who were on the right at that time, and so therefore this created the basis of this, and Hitler was a part of this. Hitler's initial political ideas came from pan-German nationalism, and he was very much inspired by various political thinkers, one of which, whose name I can't remember, was a nationalist, Catholic, and I think he was also an anti-Semite. And there was also these ideas like Arianism and different cult. And I don't even know. Can't verify this, but I've also heard neo-pagan type ideas. Whatever the case, all these different kind of ideas kind of got wrapped up into Hitler's kind of political thinking, and he brought a lot of these ideas into the German Workers' Party, and also and built up the party around this, brought in a lot of people, created a paramilitary organization. And as time went on, the important thing about this is that he made the party more to the right. He brought the party more to the right. And several years later, after he took power, the socialism and National Socialism became an embarrassment for him. The reason for this was very simple. He could not. He was afraid he would have trouble getting the support of nationalist industrialists who were nationalists and who were supporting the party. Therefore, he was afraid that he would not get the support of these individuals if the party was thought to be basically a socialist party. Therefore, the term socialism was an embarrassment. He tried to redefine it, saying it was just about solidarity of the race, or whatever the case may be. That's how he tried to redefine it. But it didn't take away from the fact that there was at that point still a strong left-wing element within the party. And these leftists, despite their nationalist, their almost racial feelings and that kind of thing, they were essentially at their core leftist, left-wing socialists, basically. And this was personified in Gregor Strasser and Otto Strasser. They made up the left-wing faction alongside Joseph Goebbels. And these guys wanted to ally themselves with the Soviet Union, wanted to pursue kind of more of a nationalization of industry, that kind of thing. All the typical socialist policies. And when Hitler found this out, he was absolutely aggravated, livid, because this reflected everything that he was against and everything he was fighting for. He was against Marxism, against liberalism, against all this stuff. And so he went out of his way to break that. And eventually he got, I guess, at one point, Goebbels switched sides, betrayed the Strassers. One of the Strassers was shot, and the other fled to Canada, breaking the left-wing faction. So that was the end of the left-wing faction of Nazism. But yeah, those ideas still remain the same within Strasserism. We know that as Strasserism today, the left-wing, the variant of left-wing Nazism. And then even today, there's kind of a variation of that, which is called third positionism, which is more of a left-wing, has more of a left-wing mindset in terms of economics and national liberation, that kind of thing. Than the other variant of Nazism, which is more strictly white supremacist and want white people and the alien race to dominate the earth. But that's what happened with that. So the idea that Hitler is not a leftist, or Hitler was a leftist, is ridiculous. It was ridiculous. He was not a leftist at all. He was utterly opposed to leftism. Now, people like Glenn Beck take that out of context and say, for example, there's a quote by Goebbels who compared Hitler to Lenin, and that there was certain left-wing elements that gave birth to both fascism and Nazism. It obscures the point. The fact of the matter is the Nazis were in many ways more reactionary, and even in many ways more conservative than even the fascists were. So we remember them today for having this mindset, and it's just actually become more the case today. And these groups are more to the right than they were even in the early days, and that's the reality of that. So things evolve, and that's why I had to kind of point this out. It's a long video, but it's a lot to cram into one video. But anyway, so alright, so I guess I have to kind of finish up and try to consolidate some final points about the things I'm saying. But on the subject of third way or centrist ideas or political ideas, ideas that are neither left or right but have blends of both. Libertarianism, the modern ideology of people like Rocking Mr.E and others, I would say is also a third way or centrist mindset, because a lot of libertarians might say, for example, that they're socially liberal, favor of personal freedom, having sex with whoever you want, things like that. Personal freedom in a very kind of egalitarian sense. That is, there's no standards. Whereas let me just concentrate on what I'm saying here. That's what they want. They want just people to screw whoever they want and put whatever they want in their bodies, and that's the thing. And then they tend to also apply that to their views on wealth, and they believe that people should be allowed to pursue how much wealth that they want. There should be no standards in how much wealth you should pursue, in their view. And that's libertarianism. So it's a belief in the idea that capitalism is freedom and liberty, essentially, And probably the main difference, then that also manifests in, say, a left-wing or right-wing libertarian mindset within this modern libertarian ideology, where you have people like Rocking Mr.E who put more stock in property, and I would say, Rocking Mr.E, that you put more stock in things like property and that kind of thing, and in the economic sphere and the material sphere, believing that that's much closer to freedom than anything else. And then there'd be more left wing libertarians who would probably put more emphasis on the liberty faction and put people and their personal liberty above economics. And that's how I would think of your ideology. So, long video. I didn't really want to make this that long. But to recap and to break down some final points, if you want to be able to think of this politics, this left and right thinking, or authoritarian, libertarian thinking, what becomes very clear, or good examples to think of it as, is to think of King George as a right-wing authoritarian. Barry Goldwater as a right-wing libertarian, Mao as a left-wing authoritarian, and Noam Chomsky as a left-wing libertarian. Now, if you believe all of that is, whether you're on the right or the left, and you believe all of it is, disingenuous, is really not the point. If you think really Noam Chomsky is secretly an authoritarian communist, whatever, not the point. The fact is what they say they are. And that's really the stock. I'm putting more stock in that than I am in some conspiratorial thinking, because I can't know what's in what are the motives of somebody like a Noam Chomsky. That's what my point is. And I'm not gonna, I sort of talked a lot about, if you look at some like my last two videos, I talk about my own political ideology. I'm not going to really touch on that here. Or to emphasize how I think of these things. Mine's my own little synthesis of various ideas. I'm both conservative and liberal on different topics. On economics, I do agree more with the left. I'm much more in agreement with the left on economics, but on social issues, culture, things like that, I'm a little bit more. On social issues, I do agree with libertarians, but on cultural issues, that is heritage, national sovereignty, I agree with more of the right-wing conservative mindset. I'm admittedly sort of a nationalist, not an ethnic nationalist, but more of a civic nationalist. I'm just a believer in political sovereignty, national sovereignty, that kind of thing. and in national government and in national laws, that kind of thing. And even on economics, I also an agreement there. I'm a protectionist. I believe in protective tariffs and national banks and that kind of thing. Not central banks, national banks. And that's my own politics. In the socialist, I do believe in personal freedom and respect for the individual, but I believe that that should be tempered by a traditional culture. If I had my way, I'd go back to a more traditional culture of the kind that existed in agrarian times. Not the miserable part of agrarian societies, but the positive human culture that has been destroyed by modern technology and modern industry. And I don't really like the kind of nihilistic mentality that seems to exist in the modern era. So, also, one last thing I want to point out is if people are disagreeing with me, and I plan to put some articles and things like that in the low bar for people to look at if they want to see what I'm talking about. But if you disagree with me, it should be pointed out that to a large degree, most people who are actually, politically to the far right, for example, regard themselves as being on the far right. There's a group I came across the other day, just flipping on the internet. Actually, I was reading about the conservative revolutionary movement in Germany the other day, and I came across this website which was saying that they were reflecting views of what they were calling the North American New Right, the difference between the old right, and they described their views in detail. And it's very explicit. They explicitly believe in a difference between superiority and inferiority, and they believe that one is better than the other. And they have just a bunch of books on far right wing books, just a whole bunch of things on this website. And I plan to put a link to that. And now if you're like, say, Bernard Chapin, for example, who believes that the right is for equality and individuality, read some of that, read some of what they believe, and see what you think. This is what right wing politics has always been. This is my main point. You can't make an argument that it's individualistic or it's egalitarian. And of course, I also want to point out that there's differences, and conservatism, for example, is situational, which is why, for example, those who want to preserve the Maoist traditions within, say, China, would be the conservatives. And actually, if you read about, I'm going to also probably put this in low bar. If you read about the conservatives there who want to preserve those Maoist traditions, some of them are inspired by Edmund Burke. Therefore, conservatism is situational. Conservatism is about heritage and puts more stock in the current state of affairs than it does in overthrowing it or creating something new. And so all of this is the way things are. It's the reality. It's how things actually are. And I kind of feel bad that I made this video as long as I did, but it's a lot to cram into one thing. And I've been thinking for a long time about whether or not I want to do a video like this. Not a long one, but on this topic. And I think it's an important topic for everybody to look into, and for you to think about what your political views may be, and think rationally about it. Don't think of it the way libertarians do. Libertarians are just as extreme as anybody else in their views. They're so extreme. They think the whole world is the difference between coercion and whatever, when you almost can't get away from it. You can't get away from coercion. But, I'm not going to go on anymore. I'm looking at my the little timer on my recorder, and it's I've been sitting here talking for about, an hour and 4 minutes, and I was planning to go to breakfast. So I guess I'll end here, and I really hope I touched on everything I wanted to touch on. I can't think of anything else that I wanted to say that was really important. But anyway, that's it. I'll end here, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.